Hello, everybody. Welcome to Little Rusty Buckets. I have a weirder topic video for you guys today. I don't really do as much media analysis stuff around here, but I kind of want to. So if you actually end up liking this, please, please, please give it a like to show me that you guys like this content. But I've been thinking about true crime content for a while now. I've even thought about making like a longer form video about this someday on like a channel that is unrelated to sports, but it doesn't seem like I'm going to be getting around to that anytime soon, so I figured I would just do this over here. I have been like a pretty passive consumer of true crime content for quite a while now because I do find it fascinating. I have always been intrigued by just the absolute worst of humanity, which I don't know. There is you can call it a morbid curiosity or whatever you want to, whatever you would use to describe it. I do find myself fascinated by a lot of this content. So I'm not going into this just judging anyone who consumes true crime content, but there is a feel about it. There is a way about it, like both the like the YouTube content, and then like documentaries, and especially what I'm going to primarily focus on in today's video, which is the Netflix Monsters series. So that was one that has been very, very controversial for a while now. It started with the Jeffrey Dahmer show, and I don't even remember the name of the actor who played him, but it was like controversial that he was hot, and it was controversial that they were like doing this kind of sexualizing framing of him where they were making like sweaty ab shots of Jeffrey Dahmer. But like, as much as that whole series is like, as much as making that Jeffrey Dahmer show is like conceptually bad from the ground up, I did feel as though some of the criticism for that show was a little over exaggerated, like only a little bit, because the director of it, Ryan Murphy, had a history of putting like real life type events in his American Horror Story show that I watched like 2 seasons of and checked out on because I didn't think it was very good. But like, I felt like the show was basically as respectful with the subject matter as it could be. The issue is it's a subject matter that is pretty much inherently disrespectful to recreate and dramatize. And like, the big criticism, and naturally so, is the victims of Jeffrey Dahmer, their family members, are very much alive and very much still dealing with the trauma associated with that. And now they have to deal with this show being as prevalent as it is. And like, I think something that was highlighted at the time was like the guy who broke free from Dahmer and brought the police to his apartment is currently homeless and was like sleeping on the streets the same night that the actor who played Jeffrey was winning is it Tony? That's the TV award. It's not the Tony. Emmy. Yeah, he won an Emmy. And it's like, yeah, so while the people who were victimized by Dahmer are still very much living with the consequence of that victimization, other people are making shows about it and making millions of dollars off of it and dramatizing it and like misrepresenting. A big part of it was, I believe, one of his victims, Tony Hughes. They like portrayed them as having like a super prolonged relationship when I believe it was only a brief period of time. So like, there's already a bunch of stuff that's very ethically bad about that. However, and I will say I have not watched in full the following 2 seasons, but it seems like the treading the line of actually being as ethical as possible has just been thrown out of the window. Like, something that I would give the Dahmer show is that like, I feel like the second half of the season, like a very hefty chunk of the season was emphasizing the way that like systemic racism was the reason why Jeffrey Dahmer was so successful for so long, because he wasn't a genius. This isn't like the stereotype of like, oh, the 130 IQ serial killer. No, Jeffrey Dahmer was a fucking idiot who was behaving as unsafe, like or as not inconspicuous. He was as conspicuous as possible. Literally, his neighbors were complaining complaining about the smell of dying flesh, and he excused it by saying that he had like a fish tank die, or like he had gotten a big order of meat and it was rotting. But the only reason these complaints were ignored, the reason why he was not caught way earlier and he was able to kill, I think it was either like 17 or 19 people, was because they didn't give a shit whenever a black person called the cops and was like, hey, some weird shit's going on. There was even a case of a fucking 13-year-old boy who stumbled out of his apartment, and these, I think it was like 2 or 3 different black women, and this is created more so one-to-one to how it happened in reality. So this part is true. Like, was completely like I think Dahmer said that they were boyfriends, and like that was another factor of it, was homophobia of the time, where these cops were like, oh, this is some gay shit, I don't know, whatever, just get out of here, you gay-mos, like I'm not trying to deal with that shit. But they portrayed that aspect of things, which I think is an under-discussed part of it, and it kind of brought, you know, actual perspective to that. And like an argument that a lot of people make about true crime content is that it's like informative. That's true in the sense that you are learning something from it. However, informative in what way that's helpful? Because I'm sorry to tell you, well, I'm not sorry to tell you, I guess this is a good thing. You're not going to be killed by a serial killer. You know, knock on wood for yourself if you really need it, but like that is not a thing that is very likely to happen. It was already like far less prevalent in the 90s. Like, it's so much easier to get caught now. Like, it's such a small likelihood. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of ways that you are going to die before a serial killer is getting you. And I don't really think like learning the mind of a serial killer, quote unquote, is really going to benefit you that much. I really don't think it has a practical application in life at all, and certainly not to the point that it necessitates studying all this shit. So I don't really think that is a valid reason. I also think true crime content makes people fucking paranoid. I can tell you in my own personal experience, I've encountered some women in my day who are way over paranoid about getting snatched up. Not that that's not a fucking thing that happens. All right. It absolutely is. I'm not saying that's not the case, but like people who just straight up refuse to live their lives for real out of fear. I just don't think that it's actually that educational. I think there's a million different things that you could learn about that are more important. If you're trying to learn ways to not die, methods of avoiding serial killers should be pretty much on the bottom of that list, because it is such a statistical improbability. So I don't think it's educational, but the show, again, to me, I think it did enough, but I also still think it should not exist. Just fundamentally as a concept, you just shouldn't do it. But if you're going to do it, my mindset on that time was, well, at least it was better than it could have been. However, then they made a show on the Menendez brothers. If you don't know the details of that case, they killed their parents, I believe, with shotguns. And there was alleged assault that was happening between the parents and the kids. And there was a very big case in the 1990s. And there was a lot of controversy around it, because there is debate to the degree in which the perpetrators of these murders were actually victims who had righteous reasons to do it. The show portrays these brothers as having like an incestuous relationship and like many other things. And then like the criticism of like over sexualizing these dudes, like they did it to a millionth degree more in the second season than they did with Dahmer. But I didn't watch any of that. I've watched videos about it. I've never really been that interested in the Menendez case, so like I didn't really care about that shit. However, I watched the Ed Gein season, or I watched like 3.5 episodes before I checked out. And I have heard what happens after, and it gave me all the more reason not to be interested in continuing to watch it. But my thought going into that was like, okay, Menendez, that happened in the 90s. Jeffrey Dahmer, that happened in the late 80s, early 90s. The problem there is the consequences of that are still very much being felt today in a very direct way. But Ed Gein committed the crimes, the 2 murders that he is known to have done in the 40s, I think the late 40s, and was caught in the 50s. And he also was not a prolific killer. He technically really shouldn't even be labeled as a serial killer because he's only known to have killed 2 people. But if you did not know about Ed Gein, he inspired Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He inspired fucking Psycho, like the one in the 60s or whatever with fucking, what's his name, Jason Bateman? No, that's not it. God, I'm blanking on the name. And then it was an Alfred Hitchcock movie, and then also Silence of the Lambs. Oh man, so my thought process was, this happened so long ago. The reason that inspiration exists, by the way, sorry if this video is kind of scatterbrained, but the reason that inspiration existed is because the fucking freak in his freak house on his lonesome being a freak was digging up graves and making stuff out of human skin. So yeah, very ghoulish individual who understandably has inspired a lot of horror tropes. However, this show, like, my mindset was, this shit happened in the 40s and 50s, so at least it's far less likely to actually be like that offensive to literal survivors or literal family members of victims. Even though it's still possible, it's like, yeah, my grandma died to him and I never knew her, like some shit like that. Like, that's better than literally like the mother of a child killed by Jeffrey Dahmer still being alive. You know what I mean? So I was like, this has more possibility to be like the far more ethical way to do this than anything else. Again, probably shouldn't exist, but if it's going to, at least do something as ethically as possible. But no, the thing is, Ed Gein killed 2 people, and the rest of the shit he did was just being a fucking little freak at his house by himself. So like, there's not exactly a lot of content there. So what the show does instead is talk about like the production of Psycho, and like they overlap like Ed Gein's fantasies also being related to those movies. So like, he's fantasizing about the future. That's stupid. You've lost me there. You don't have me believing that, what did he predict the future type shit. And then we also just get inside the mind of this very, in case you didn't pick up on it by the human skin suits, very deeply mentally disturbed person. You're seeing his like imagination a lot of the times, and it's like some very upsetting, offensive shit, and like not in a way that is like, hey, he's crazy, he imagines crazy shit, but like the one thing that Ed Gein was obsessed with the Holocaust. He has this delusion where there's like hundreds of Holocaust survivors running at him, like breaking into his house, like hundreds of them outside, banging on the walls, banging on the doors, throwing rocks through the windows. Like, and I'm just like, do we need that? Do we need to see that? He also, there was like these pulp comics made around this Nazi woman. This video is going to get demonetized like fucking crazy. I've said so many things you're not supposed to on YouTube, but whatever. This Nazi woman, and she's like doing these horrible experiments to captives in the concentration camp. And I'm like, does this need to be portrayed? This is like really traumatic. It's like trauma porn, and that's what has been said to be what these are. And you could claim that that's what true crime content kind of is in general. It was very disturbing, and like not in a way that is at all really that related to this story itself, other than like, yeah, Ed Gein had weird fantasies. He also had fantasies that were real things that happened directly, so it almost kind of blurs that line. They also, I don't remember the name of the actor, so forgive me, but the actor who played the titular Psycho in the movie Psycho, he was gay, and in Hollywood in the 60s that was not kosher. So the studio like made him do electroshock therapy for like the sake of his career. Like, that's what happens. The studio was like, you have to do this. Like, we don't know that we'll be able to keep you around. We don't know that you'll be able to have a career. I think his management, like the studio, like a bunch of different people were like really in his ear trying to convince him to make this happen. But what happens in the show is he just decides to do this of his own volition. And they also, like, Alfred Hitchcock does this in the show, and I'm one to believe that this is something that could have happened. I'm not saying it's not, but like more or less it's implied that Alfred Hitchcock knows that he's gay, and he's like, well, you know, Ed Gein had this terrible secret of deviancy, and you have this terrible secret of deviancy. You guys are basically the same. And I would actually applaud this if the show was like, yeah, what a fucking crazy thing to say. What a crazy thing to believe. Look how incorrect that was. But from my understanding, and again, this is mostly shit that happened after I watched, they're like, yeah, that's pretty apt. Yeah, he's gay. He's just like Ed Gein. Like, what the fuck? And I'm pretty sure the guy who made this shit is gay. I'm pretty sure Ryan Murphy is a gay man. So I just don't fucking understand. Like, maybe it was trying to make the commentary that was just like how evil Hollywood was at the time. But I think by having him not by having him do conversion therapy of his own volition instead of being pressured into it, it is absolutely painting a completely different picture that is contradictory to that message. So optimistically, it was trying to portray a good message and failed. Pessimistically, oh fucking boy, that one's bad. And speaking of that, probably the last thing I will harp on here, at least as it relates to this show, they portray Ed Gein as like this super prolific cross-dresser. Like, it is foundational. Literally the first scene of Ed Gein in the show, he is cross-dressing. And there is no evidence of that. There is zero evidence to suggest that he was a cross-dresser. The show also alludes to him being trans, but not knowing it because it's the damn 40s. There is very little to substantiate that. The only thing that you could say to substantiate that is that he wears a woman suit, but it's his mother's dead body, it's his mother's skin, and the only time that he puts on women's clothing is when he's wearing his mother's skin. And hot take, that's about a little bit more than cross-dressing at that point to me. I think that's something else. And like, that's the inspiration that went to Silence of the Lambs. And Silence of the Lambs is a great movie. It is highly praised for a good reason. It is one of the best crime thrillers ever made. But Buffalo Bill is portrayed as essentially a trans woman who chooses to kill a bunch of women to make a skin suit of them. That is not why Ed Gein did it. He didn't want to be a woman. He wanted to keep the memory of his mother alive by putting her skin on his body and pretending to be her. And this allusion to like transness as the core issue with Ed Gein, the core fundamental reason behind him doing the weird things that he does, I just think that's really dangerous and very much implies like some very horrific things about trans people. In the same way that the Silence of the Lambs does as well. I think it does it about as respectfully as it can. Like, I think there's even a line where in there where they talk about how like transgender people are actually more likely to be a victim of a crime than to commit it themselves. Like, at least it's trying to say that it's not that other shit, but it's definitely still ethically dubious. But that shit came out in the 90s. This is a gay man making this point about trans people now. And again, maybe there's this more optimistic angle on it. Maybe it's actually trying to say a positive message, but that shit got lost in translation to me. And based on what I've seen from people talking about it who actually finished the series, it doesn't really seem like a positive point gets across. So that shit's just baffling to me. I cannot wrap my mind around these decisions. And it ended up being so much more offensive than even the Jeffrey Dahmer show. And I am not one to use the term offensive. I know I'm a leftist or whatever, you know, big crybaby soy boy. Side note, it's very funny when people call me a soy boy because I actually do not have nearly enough soy in my diet, but that's a whole other point. I don't use the term offensive almost at all, like really at all, because I can be like, duh, that's bad, that's distasteful. I really wouldn't use the word offensive very frequently. It's not in my vocabulary. This shit's straight up offensive. It's offensive to gay people, it's offensive to trans people, it's offensive to Jewish people. Like, and to me, it's more baffling that it managed to be less over the top, offensive, and ridiculous in the real case of 17 people being killed less than 30 years ago, or a little over 30 years ago. And how is that trail of way more people dying, way more recently, way more horrifically, way more frequently. How do you do that more respectfully and less offensively than some shit that happened in the 40s? It's baffling to me. I cannot believe it. The only thing that made me understand it on the onset was I was like, man, there's not that much content in this. Again, he killed 2 people and then he was a freak in his house alone. How many episodes of television can you really make out of that? So yeah, it makes me uncomfortable. It's a lot of it is like literal like murder porn. A lot of it is super, super unethical. But at the same time, like I find fucking freaks, these evil monsters. Oh my God, that's the name of the series. I find them compelling, but I really don't think making dramatizations, making television shows about these real things, I don't think that's productive, but it does damn well. It's the #1 show on Netflix for quite a while. The Jeffrey Dahmer show was fucking massive. So like it pays, and it's going to keep happening because it pays. And that's always the way that it goes. Ethics are nothing in comparison to money. But I couldn't believe how much I was actually bothered by the first 4 episodes. And I checked out. Like, not only was it offensive, it was boring too. It was a very poorly made show. Someone needs to take the camera away from Ryan Murphy. He needs to stop, go make some other shit that isn't related to real life, please, because you are not good at it. Like I said, I think the Dahmer show is actually done more ethically than expected, even if it's fundamentally unethical, but it just got worse and worse with each installment. The last thing I'll talk about, just true crime content in general. I think if you're going to do it, this is my take. If you're going to do this shit on YouTube, you're going to do this shit on TikTok, you're going to do it on the internet, stop saying unalive. Stop saying unalive. Stop saying graped. If you're going to talk about these real horrifying, heinous things that happen to these people, cut that TikTok talk out of it. It drives me fucking nuts. It makes me not want to watch whoever does it. Like, I'm sorry that your video about murder is going to get a worse monetization rating, but like if you're going to talk about real shit, talk about it real. That really bothers me. It's probably, to me, like I've talked about this before. I'm a big believer in speaking plainly. I think you should say the words that you mean as you mean them and not self-censor, not try to avoid the bots and shit. Like when I have talked about Israel or Palestine or like these different atrocities, when I talked about fucking Jeffrey Epstein, when I was talking about the Stephen A. Smith reaction to it, like Jeffrey Epstein raped children, and you should say that because it doesn't feel good to say, and I'm sure it doesn't feel good to hear, but it shouldn't. You should be put off by these things, and I think the more you self-censor, the more you make it cutesy, the more you do fucking jokes in the middle of talking about this shit, the more you trivialize it, and the more disrespectful I think it is. So yeah, I hated the Ed Gein show. I hated Netflix's Monster. Take Ryan Murphy's camera away, and if you're a YouTuber making true crime content, say the words that are what happened. All right, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think. I'm really interested to see the comment section on this one. I want to know what y'all think of this. I will probably try to make some more just general media analysis videos more often. These are just off of the dome, so it's not the best version of that kind of content, but I enjoy talking about it. Yeah, that's it. Thanks.